The Christmas Scarf by Pastor Dave Watson. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 1. Flurries before Thanksgiving? Global warming? Really? Molly asked to no one in particular, seeing that she was alone in her car. She was headed to the mall to return some shoes 2 weeks before she thought would be the kickoff of the dreaded holiday season, Black Friday. Dreaded because to say this year was going to be rough was an understatement. For the last decade, every year it seemed brought either drama or tragedy. First, there was her father's death. 2 years later, her divorce. How can someone just walk out on 22 years of marriage? She often pined. Then 2 years later, her mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. 2 years later, her mom fell down the steps and never regained consciousness. Molly didn't even get a chance to say goodbye, or I love you, or to make up with her from a horrible fight they had a couple of weeks before. Then there was last year. Just thinking of it made Molly nauseous. Rebecca was the only child Jake and Molly had. She and Molly were best friends. When Jake walked out of their lives, they became like sisters. They shared almost everything together, even clothes. Rebecca was a good kid. No, more than a good kid. She was a great daughter and an amazing friend to her mother. Why had she let her go to the beach that weekend with her friends? Molly thought. She could never forgive herself. She wished she had persuaded her 20-year-old daughter to stay at home, but she didn't. In reality, she couldn't. As Molly's car circled the parking lot looking for a spot, she thought of all the times her and her daughter had come here and how much fun they had together. They made this trip together so many times. When she looked to her right to the passenger seat, she half expected to see Rebecca there, but she wasn't. The seat had been empty for over a year. It was all still so painful. 15 months ago, a sunny August morning had turned into a parent's worst nightmare. Words like accident, drunk driver, crossing into her lane, and coma were things you heard on television or read about online. That day, they were part of a conversation from a Jersey state trooper on her cell phone. By the time she got to the hospital, it was too late. Rebecca never woke up, and Molly never got to say goodbye, or I love you, or anything else. It's beginning to look a lot like Christmas everywhere you go. The words to the song jolted Molly into the reality of the season as she entered the second floor of Macy's through the automatic doors. It was like she had been sucker punched in the stomach. Now she really felt like she might vomit. She turned on her heels and hurried back to her car. She couldn't do this. Not now. Back in her car, she took a few deep breaths and regrouped. She turned on the radio to hear some soothing music from the Christian contemporary station she had taken comfort in over the last few months. It's the most wonderful time of the year, were the first words seemingly blaring out of the speakers. No, it is not, she shouted. It's the worst, the very worst. With that, she pounded the off button on the radio, dropped her head on her steering wheel, and wept like she had so often wept in the previous months. She knew now what she wished she didn't have to know. Last year, she was numb and in shock. This year would be different. This year, she would be fully awake, and the wound in her heart would be ripped wide open by the joys of the season. Back in her 2-bedroom apartment, she longed to be close to Rebecca again, to connect with her, to enjoy another memory together. Her friends had done their best to console her, but had failed miserably. There was no consolation to be had. People at work told her that her faith would get her through. That was almost funny. She had no faith. She had lost so much, so quickly. Her dad, her marriage, her mom, and her only child. Somewhere in the mix, she had also lost her faith. She didn't, check that, couldn't believe in anything. She had left Rebecca's room almost as Rebecca had left it when she went to the beach a little over a year ago. She could barely make herself go in there. Today she needed to reconnect with the memory of her daughter, so she forced herself to go in and to sit on the bed. For an hour, all she could do was bury her head in Rebecca's pillow and smell the lingering scent of her lilac perfume. She had long since given up on prayer. All she could do was cry. Again. When she finally picked up her head, something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. It was peeking out of the closet from a basket stored there. It was 2 steel needles, knitting needles to be exact. Leaving the bed, she picked them up. What are these doing here? She thought. They seemed out of place. Rebecca didn't knit, did she? Molly wondered out loud. Molly's mom had taught her, but Molly had no memory of teaching her daughter. Below the needles, still attached, was a project that was already started. A couple or 3 white rows had been put together. After them were 5 or 6 rows of green, with a half ball of unused yarn still attached to one of the needles. She picked it up and began to add rows to the project. Knit 1, purl 2, she heard herself saying. Handling something that Rebecca had touched, working on something that Rebecca had worked on, made Molly feel so close to her daughter. It wasn't just a mystical thing, just a deep feeling for a few moments. As she knit, she and Rebecca were together again. By now the flurries had morphed into a snow shower. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 2. The traffic was crazy, but what would you expect for Black Friday? The lightly snow falling wasn't helping the matter. Molly had tried to stay off the roads, but she needed something, and she needed it now. It had been 2 weeks since she had discovered the knitting needles and the yarn in Rebecca's closet. She had followed her daughter's green pattern until she ran out of green yarn, and then used up whatever white yarn there was to extend things. But now she could not go any further because she was simply out of yarn. Molly had made it through Thanksgiving Day, but just barely. Last year, 4 months after Rebecca's death, she had gone over some friend's home for Thanksgiving dinner and did her best to muddle through. It didn't work. She vowed right then and there that she would never again sit around a table with all eyes looking at her in pity. This year, she did the brave thing. She stayed in bed all day. She changed her cell phone message to, "Sorry, missed your call. I won't be available for a few days." An auto reply on her text to, "I'm out of the area. Let's connect when I get back." The extent of her Thanksgiving celebration was watching It's a Wonderful Life for the zillionth time. And it felt like it. This holiday season had again opened the wound that was her heart. With no one around, she felt the hole from the loss of Rebecca more sharply than she expected. The death of her parents and the breakup of her marriage had also been amplified in the emptiness of her days. Now she was desperate to return to the knitting project, whatever it was supposed to be, to reconnect with her daughter, just like she had a few days earlier. If she just hadn't run out of yarn. Now she had to go out on Black Friday, the worst day in this, the worst time of the year. She sighed with relief as she found a parking space close to the door of the Hobby Lobby store. She'd driven for 45 minutes to travel the 5 miles that the store was from her apartment. She knew they would have the yarn she needed in abundance. She quickly made her way into the store and was greeted by an elderly store employee asking if she needed help. Polite and gracious through Molly's hurried pace, the woman whose name tag read Gracia and whose accent revealed her Latino heritage was clearly pushing 75. Molly wondered what this woman was doing working on Black Friday, and much less what she was doing working at all. She personally escorted Molly to the yarn section upon finding out what she was looking for. Molly stood in the middle of the aisle viewing the multitude of choices and nearly broke into tears. It hadn't fully occurred to her until this moment that since she didn't really know what she was knitting, she really didn't know what she needed. Clearly, she wasn't working with the clearest of heads. Gracia had been observing her from a short distance away and now spoke to her as she came to the end of her aisle. "Can I help you further?" she said in a soft tone. Not wanting to explain, Molly heard herself reply, "I'm just trying to make something for Christmas, and I'm not sure what colors to use." Gracia now was right next to her, and reaching up, she picked out a green, white, and a dark blue spool of yarn. "These always seem Christmassy to me," she said. Taking them and pivoting away in a hurry, without thinking, Molly said, "Thank you, Gracia." "My friends call me Grace," Gracia shouted after the scurrying Molly. "Happy holidays and Merry Christmas," she continued. Because of the Black Friday cashier lines, Molly's pace was forced to slow. Standing with the other shoppers, waiting to make her purchase, she looked around at the other merchandise. She allowed herself a few moments of gazing at what the store offered. Lots and lots of craft stuff, she thought. Gotta come back here when there are less people. Standing halfway down the aisle because of the crowd, her eyes caught a colorful framed word art poster. In dark blue letters on a bright white background, she saw the word Grace spelled vertically on the canvas. Next to each letter was a word going across horizontally. Forming an acrostic, it read, God's riches at Christ's expense. And then in green letters in a block near the bottom it read, That is what Christmas is all about. As she worked her way to the cashier, she kept glancing back at the poster. She'd never heard it put that way before. It kind of made sense and gave some real meaning to what had become for her an empty holiday. Just then, Gracia appeared again, having been sent to direct people to the fastest lines. Molly shouted over to her, Grace, could you help me? When Gracia got close enough for no one else to hear, she whispered to her while pointing to the poster that had caught her eye. Please get that Grace poster for me so I don't have to get out of line. Gracia quickly got it for her, and as quickly as she came, she was gone helping someone else. I hope I'm that spry at that age, thought Molly. Inside her car, Molly prepared to make her way home. She was satisfied with her purchases and examined them. She paused as she considered the coincidence coming out of her shopping bag. The Grace poster in dark blue, white, and green, and the balls of yarn in dark blue, white, and green, all secured by Gracia, or as her friends call her, Grace. As she looked at these items, Molly felt a slight chill up her spine, and it wasn't because it was still snowing. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 3. The ride home was quicker than Molly had expected. The snowstorm had turned into snow flurries, and the traffic had eased a bit. She was still a bit taken aback by the coincidences in her shopping bag, but was now chalking them up to indeed just that, or maybe just the miracles of the season, whatever that meant. Either way, she was ready to settle into a quiet weekend alone in her apartment, working on the project to connect with Rebecca, whatever it was supposed to be. Arriving at her front door, she was greeted by a small brown box. Strange, she thought. She didn't remember ordering anything and wasn't expecting anything from anyone. Picking up the boxes as she opened the door, she was struck by how light it was, as if it contained nothing at all. Closing her door, she placed the package on the kitchen table, set down her shopping bag, and hung up her coat. Attentively, she began to examine the package like it was from CSI. It was clearly addressed to her and had a strange return address. It read, Properties Division, NJST, Ocean County, New Jersey. The more she looked at the little brown package, the more it baffled her. Who? What? Where? When? These all ran together in her mind like one long, run-on sentence. The small package opened so easily it surprised Molly. Fully opened, its contents stared up at her. Wrapped in notebook paper was a metal object, which when picked up was revealed to be a badly beaten up red cell phone. Molly was stunned because even in its trashed state, she recognized it immediately to be Rebecca's cell phone. The phone had been missing since the accident. Molly gripped it oh so tight, first fighting back, then giving into tears. The questions who, what, where, and when were answered for in a simple note written on the paper that the red phone was wrapped in. It read, Recently this phone was turned into our division. It was found near the accident site that took your daughter's life. I remembered you from your visit with us to pick up your daughter's belongings. I did a little research using serial numbers and connected this phone to your daughter's case. I thought you might like to have it. With deepest sympathy, Officer Jill Johnson, Properties Division, New Jersey State Troopers. Molly wasn't surprised when she pressed the power button and the phone didn't light up. She expected that. What surprised her was when she plugged it into a charger for a few moments and hit the power button, it did light up. In just a few seconds, with no password needed, Molly was staring at a screen filled with Rebecca's Android apps. Molly wasn't sure what to do next. She felt like she was invading Rebecca's privacy, but she wasn't really because Rebecca was not here anymore. She wanted so badly to connect with her daughter. Was this coincidence at the time of her deepest grief orchestrated by someone to help her do just that? She began with the text messaging app. Touching the keyboard on the screen where Rebecca's fingers had typed made her feel close to her beloved child. Scrolling through the text, she found herself grinning through her tears. The conversations with friends were so sweet, so funny, and so Rebecca. For a moment, it was as if she wasn't gone at all. One string of texts with a guy friend of hers, whose name Molly recognized, had a strange picture attached. It was a selfie of someone wearing a scarf. Wait, that someone was Rebecca in the selfie, and that scarf was green and red and blue and gold and silver and purple, with white separating the colors. The project Molly had found in the closet looked amazingly like the beginnings of this scarf. The words in the last text on the string right after the picture brought everything together. It read, "Love the scarf I made, making a second for Mom for Christmas. We'll be twins and BFFs." Pulling herself out of the phone for a second, Molly sighed with relief. At least she knew now what she was supposed to be knitting. It was a scarf, a Christmas scarf at that. Looking back at the red phone, Molly pulled up her name in a log of text to review her and her daughter's conversations. As painful as it was a gift to her, grace, if you will, to make it through the season. Touching her name, Molly saw an unfamiliar text. She had viewed and reviewed over and over the text messages her and her daughter had exchanged in the last summer days before the accident. She didn't remember this one. Rebecca hadn't had a chance to send it. It read, "Thanks, Mom, for raising me to be who I am, loving me with all my craziness and always being my best friend. God sure gave me the best mom a girl could ask for. I love you." Clutching the battered red phone, Molly ran into her room and cried her battered heart to sleep. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 4. Molly woke early the next morning, Saturday morning, to the sound of plows and sand trucks. The road crews were clearing the streets, and Molly was clearing her head. She needed to go out again. She needs more yarn, different colored yarn, to finish the project Rebecca had started. Amazingly, serendipitously, maybe even miraculously, the blue yarn picked by Gracia matched perfectly what Rebecca had started. Now all she needed was the red, the gold, the silver, and the purple. The semi-charged cell phone in hand, she went off to the same store as yesterday, hoping to run into Gracia. My friends call me Grace, again. She didn't know it would be sooner than she could have expected. As she made the turn out of her complex, she was greeted with a sight that had become so familiar she no longer noticed it. For some reason, today was different. Right in front of her were the huge red letters LOVE outside the Hilton Hotel. The word reminded her of Rebecca's last words to her in the unsent text on her damaged red phone. It gave her chills. 2 spine-tingling events in 2 days. This was a bit much for her. As she began her drive, she was again slowed by the traffic, even though it was early. Having stopped at a red light, she looked to her right and was surprised, no, shocked, to see Gracia, my friends call me Grace, standing at the bus stop in a bright gold coat and hat. Molly pulled over, rolled down her window, and shouted across through the passenger side window, "Jump in, I'm going your way." Gracia, when she recognized Molly, complied, and quickly jumping into the passenger seat, off Molly went to Hobby Lobby with Gracia, or was it Grace, in tow. The 2 strangers had an unexpected moment of awkwardness before Gracia broke the ice. "Fancy meeting you here this morning," she said with a smile. "Do you have time for a quick stop before going to Hobby Lobby?" Molly was suddenly all in with her new friend Grace. "Point the way," she heard herself saying almost enthusiastically. "Over there," said Grace, pointing to one of the toughest housing projects in the city, just to their right, down a main drag. As she turned to the intersection, Molly could not resist asking Grace where they were going. Grace replied with a smirk, "Well, of course. I mentor a young girl there, and I need to drop off her Christmas gift." Molly now had a few more questions to ask Grace, like, "How old are you? And why are you, a 75-year-old-ish woman, going to the projects alone to mentor someone? And how long have you been doing this?" Regretfully, that would all have to wait because they were pulling into the projects and Grace was already about to jump out of the car and find her beloved mentee. "You can stay in the car or follow me," she said back into the car after jumping out as it barely had come to a halt. "This will only be a minute. I can't be late for work," she added. A little overwhelmed already, Molly chose to sit this one out. Maybe next time were the words she whispered to herself. She was a bit apprehensive. She had never actually been here before. Safe in her parked car, she saw Grace approach a skinny, dark-skinned girl who looked about 12 years of age and hand her a wrapped box. They exchanged what seemed to be pleasantries, hugged, and just like that, Grace was back in the car and they were on their way to Grace's appointment and Molly's shopping destination. After a second pause of awkward silence, Molly asked Grace, "So how long have you been a mentor?" "Since my church made me aware of the opportunity," she replied. "These young girls need a steady influence in their lives. They need a good foundation. I'm trying to make a difference in one life at a time. But truth be told, I do it as much for me as for them." "How's that?" Molly managed to choke out, afraid of the answer she might hear. Grace's demeanor changed as she said in a quiet tone, "After I lost my granddaughter Jenny 3 years ago, I was a basket case. I was helping her mother raise her, and then..." Her voice trailed off. "I got so depressed I moved away. I just wanted to be alone." Molly thought she needed to pull the car over because she couldn't see the road for the tears in her own eyes. Grace continued, "But last year near Christmas, I stopped moping and started hoping again, and that's when this opportunity came. Maybe I don't have Jenny to laugh and cry with or to mentor, but with the good Lord's help, I can use my time to help others. You understand, right? I had to make my peace with God and with it. You understand, right?" she repeated. Molly was so glad they reached the store by then, and she didn't have to answer. She and Grace got out of the car and with a quick "thank you" and "you're welcome," headed for their respective stations, Grace to clock in and Molly to buy yarn. Taking out the battered red cell phone with the picture, Molly tried to discreetly match the colors and then went to check out. Grace's words, "made my peace with God," seemed to hang overhead like a cloud of smoke. How does one ever do that, she thought. How did Grace do that? And yet another twist of fate, her cashier was Grace. Grace could see Molly wasn't right. Right there in line, she found herself agreeing to meet with Grace for dinner on none other than Christmas Day, since neither of them had any other place to be. As quickly as she could, Molly was out the door to head to the safety of her apartment and to her project and to feeling close to Rebecca again. It might take a while, though. It was starting to snow. She barely recognized herself in the mirror. Her eyes had dark circles under them, her face was puffy, and her hair was disheveled. She'd called out sick for the last few days at work. She didn't have the flu, or a cold, or even a cough. She was exhausted. She couldn't sleep at night, she couldn't rest during the day because she couldn't shake Grace's question to her. She had said, "I had to make peace with it and with God. You understand, right?" She heard Grace ask it over and over and over in her mind. Molly didn't understand, and she didn't know how she could ever understand. She couldn't understand. Seeing her marriage dissolve was regrettable, but she could understand that. Her parents passing away was painful, but people get old and die. She could understand that. But losing Rebecca, how could she ever make peace with losing her? And with the God who took her? Yet Grace had somehow come to grips with a similar loss. How did she do it? Molly had to find out. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 5. It had been 3 weeks since Molly and Grace had promised to meet on Christmas Day. She had accomplished almost nothing on Rebecca's special project. It was Sunday morning, and she decided she needed to speak to Grace face to face. She needed peace, now. Throwing on a hat to cover her unkempt head and cheap scarf to keep her face semi-covered, she made her way to her car and started off for Hobby Lobby to see her new friend, Grace. Driving now the familiar route, she wasn't surprised to see Grace dressed in a stylish silver overcoat waiting at the same bus stop she'd seen her at just a few weeks earlier. Pulling over, she once again offered Grace a ride, and once again, Grace took her up on the offer. As soon as the door was shut, and before Molly could say, "Can we talk? I'm about to go crazy," Grace asked, "You got time for a quick stop to pick up the girl I mentor? I'm taking her to church this morning." "Sure," a surprised Molly replied, "but I thought you were on your way to work." "No, dear, they're closed on Sundays," Grace responded. "Do you think you and I could speak after church today?" Molly heard herself sheepishly ask as they pulled into the projects to pick up Grace's mentee. It was as if Grace didn't even hear her, for she had rolled down the window and yelled for Samantha, her mentee, to join them in the car. With her quickly loaded off, they went to a church Molly didn't know, with a young girl Molly didn't know, with a 75-ish woman Molly barely knew. This was getting to be quite a ride. Not far from the projects was Grace's church, only it didn't look like any church Molly had ever been in. It was a brick storefront on a row of stores on a garbage-strewn street in the heart of the toughest neighborhood in the city. When she parked and locked her car, Molly worried if it may be the last time she ever saw it. The church was not large numerically or spatially. The chairs were in rows facing a pulpit on a slightly elevated stage. The service wasn't bad, just long and loud. Sitting next to Grace and Samantha, Molly considered herself a little out of place, to say the least. She was Caucasian, didn't know any of the words to the songs, and looked like someone with a drinking problem. But she got through it, and by the end, she was singing the last song, Joy to the World, as if she meant it. Somehow, she just felt a little bit better. Having dropped off Samantha, Molly found herself across the table from her new friend Grace. Their burgers came quicker than Molly expected, and Grace reached over and held her hand and uttered a simple prayer. Lord, thank you for this food and for our fellowship. May I be a blessing to Molly because she sure has been a blessing to me. In your name I pray, amen. When she looked up, Molly thought she'd been to church again. It seemed God was right there in the burger joint. Staring right at her, Grace said, "So what's on your mind?" For the next 2 hours, Molly told her story. Through her tears, she repeatedly asked Grace a simple question. How do I make peace with it and with God? As the conversation came to a close, Grace gave her a simple answer. I've come to believe that when I don't understand His hand, I know I can trust His heart. My Lord is my friend. Though He slay me, I will trust Him. That's in the book of Job in the Bible. I was angry at the Lord for a long time. I told Him so. I ran away from Him, but I couldn't stay away. He's everything to me. I love Him and I can't live without Him. I asked Him for a new mission other than my granddaughter Jenny. That's when I found my church and the mentoring program and my Samantha. It still hurts. It always will. But I'm now at peace with God and His plan for me. Do you understand? Molly nodded her head in half agreement. She was beginning to understand. At home again, Molly reached for her project. She started it again. Knit 1, purl 2, knit 1, purl 2. Before long, it was time for bed, and Molly kneeled beside her bed and spoke honestly with God for the first time in her life. She poured her heart out to Him. It felt good. Exhausted but unburdened, she climbed into bed and drifted off to sleep as a fresh blanket of white snow fell outside. The Christmas Scarf, Chapter 6. The snowy days leading up to Christmas flew by and were bearable for Molly. Since her first honest-to-goodness, frank conversation with God, things were different. Not necessarily all better, but certainly different. She had had many such conversations since the first one. Bearable was a good phrase to describe how she felt. Her heart wasn't healed, but the pain that was there was not the only thing that she felt. The project was coming along, and in fact, it was almost finished. It gave her something to look forward to when she came home from work. Beyond that, she was looking forward to her Christmas Day meeting with Grace. She had helped her so much with just a few words. She hoped that at her next meeting with her, they could talk more about Grace's journey from grief to hope. Molly also had decided to do something very special for Grace. She planned to present her with the beautiful scarf that had been the project, but now was a wonderful tapestry of green, blue, red, gold, silver, and purple bands with white separating the bands. It looked great, even if Molly said so herself. The scarf had brought her close to Rebecca and would be a fitting gift to Grace, her friend, or was it her mentor? On Christmas Eve, Molly hurried home, first from work and then from a family party with uncles and aunts and nephews and cousins. It was her second Christmas without Rebecca. It seemed to her that she would always measure life with how many Christmases it had been since Rebecca's passing. And yet she could sense she was getting better. There was hope. There was enough for now. Once home, she took one last look at the scarf and then wrapped it in a beautiful purple box with a bright purple bow. She had picked out a special card for Grace as well. It wasn't really a Christmas card, but it had a snow scene on the front and a blank space to write on the inside. There Molly wrote, "Dear Grace, thank you for teaching me that I have a broken heart, not a broken life. I've got a broken dream, not a broken future. I have hope now. You are a very special person. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Your friend, Molly." It was the most personal card she could ever remember writing. Molly intended to go to bed early. She had agreed to meet Grace with Samantha, the girl she was mentoring at Grace's church. They were to meet for Christmas Day services at 10 a.m. the next morning, then go to Christmas dinner. She was actually a little excited about Christmas Day. She'd even gotten a little doll for Samantha. She walked into Rebecca's room to feel close to her on Christmas Eve. She went to her closet to pull out one of her dresses. As she looked in at the few dresses that were there, her eyes were drawn to a garment bag hidden in plain sight in the middle of the closet. Pulling it out and unzipping it, she gasped. There before her eyes was a beautiful, handcrafted green, blue, red, gold, silver, and purple scarf with white dividing each color hanging in the garment bag. It was just like the one she had seen on Rebecca's battered cell phone. That was because it was the one she had seen on Rebecca's battered cell phone. Holding the completed project, the scarf that Rebecca had made, Molly's mind raced. Why was Rebecca making 2 scarves? Molly asked out loud. The answer came easily to Molly's mind. One was to be for Molly, and one was to be for Rebecca. Molly smiled and cried all at once. Nearly a year after her passing, Rebecca had given Molly one last amazing Christmas gift. It wasn't cold in her apartment and it wasn't snowing outside, but Molly still wore the scarf to bed. The alarm clock wakened Molly much later than she intended to get up. It was 9:30 a.m. and she needed to be at Grace's church in 30 minutes. She was going to be a little more than fashionably late. She did her best to get ready quickly and get out the door, but it was at 10:15 a.m. before she threw on her new hand-woven scarf made for her by her daughter and left the house. She pulled into the church at 10:45 a.m. It was 10:50 a.m. when she snuck in the back as the congregation was singing in Spanish, Gloria a Dios en lo alto, Gloria a Dios en lo alto. The smiles on everyone's faces made her glad she had come. She looked for Grace, but she was nowhere to be seen. She was so looking forward to giving her the scarf in the box she had carried in with her. She was going to take a selfie of the 2 of them in their scarves. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Samantha sitting alone and wondered the more where Grace was. After the singing, the pastor made his way to the platform with what looked like a letter in his hand. Clearing his throat, he began to read it in Spanish. He must have noticed the puzzled look on Molly's face because he started translating it as he went. The English translation was choppy, but Molly understood it. My brothers and sisters, the letter began, I can't thank you enough for all that you've done for me, it continued. I came to you broken and bitter, hurting from the loss and running from God. You befriended me and helped me heal by the grace of our Lord. You helped me find my purpose again. I've been called back to my home, to my native country, because my sister is sick and needs me immediately. I'm sorry I couldn't be here to say goodbye. Please take care of my mentee, Samantha. You will always be in my heart. Love, Gracia. Molly was stunned. She regretted now ever exchanging her cell phone number with Grace. Her thoughts immediately turned to Samantha and her feelings of desertion. Right after the service was over, she sought her out. Putting her arm around her, she consoled her. She prayed, God help me to help her. Immediately and almost miraculously and instinctively, she knew what she needed to do. She handed the purple wrapped box with the purple bow to Samantha. Opening it, Samantha smiled a smile that went from ear to ear. Molly pointed to the scarf around her neck and helped Samantha place the just opened scarf around hers. Taking out her cell phone, Molly took a Christmas selfie of 2 girls in Christmas scarves. It would be the first of many selfies of Molly and Samantha. They walked out of church together into the freshly falling snow, 2 girls in beautiful hand-woven green, blue, red, gold, and silver and purple, separated by white, Christmas scarves.